Hello, fellow readers and BookTube members. I want to address an interesting debate that arises every now and then, and I've seen some BookTube postings about this, and I hear it from friends and other people, and it's the debate about whether to finish or not to finish a book that you've started. And it would seem from my very unscientific survey of these things that the trend is more towards not finishing a book, that it's okay to not finish a book. And the reasons that are given for that, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, this is a very unscientific survey that I've taken, but just from BookTube alone, some of the excuses I've seen are I'm not connecting with the characters or the author of the book, so therefore I'm not going to finish it. Or the book is offensive. There's something about the book that just offends me to such a degree I can't read another page. Or it might be that the book is too hard. There are some terms in here or concepts that are just simply beyond me. Another excuse for not finishing a book is that it's too long, or that it's boring, or that the book just isn't working for me. Of course, the ultimate rationale behind all of these excuses for not finishing a book is life is too short. Why waste it on a bad book or a book that you don't enjoy? Or another way of saying this is there are so many books in the world. Why be stalled out by a book that you don't like? Why waste a week or a couple of weeks on a book that just isn't doing it for you? A lot of these excuses are very understandable. I totally get it. There's also something very American about this general attitude or the explanations given for not reading these books. And please don't accuse me of being unpatriotic or anti-American. I love this country. I'm glad I was born here. I'm very appreciative of the magnificent advantages that come with being American, and one of them being free speech and the ability to read whatever it is we want to read. I'm not knocking the country, but there is a kind of American characteristic that's very prevalent, and it's really emerged a great deal, maybe over the past 20 or 30 years, and that's that the demand for instant gratification, as if instant gratification was a right enshrined in the Constitution. It isn't, by the way. But it's just this idea of I want it and I want it now. Entertain me. Keep me amused. Shut up and sing. This kind of thing. And, it's an interesting attitude. But I don't know if you're a true lover of books and a true reader of books. I don't think that attitude should apply, or that kind of general thing in the zeitgeist, the immediate thing, because reading requires some downtime. It requires some meditation. It requires that you put aside some quality time to get yourself into a book. Reading is not about instant gratification, or at least not if you're reading for some of the wonderful things that reading a book can offer you, some of the many advantages it can offer. And looking at some of those excuses that I mentioned a while ago, they seem decent. Many of them kind of are, but if you look at them a little more deeply, they're all pretty thin. For example, I don't connect with the characters or the author. I'm not exactly sure what this means. I think what it means is the characters in the novel are people that are nothing like you. You don't understand what their life situation is. Or the author is expressing viewpoints that have no bearing on your life, or viewpoints that just are irrelevant to your existence. And I would say if that's the reason you're going to stop reading the book, I would just say, so what? So what if the author isn't like you and the characters aren't relevant to your life? Part of the wonderfulness of reading, or the joy of reading, is that you get exposed to different people who are not like you, or you hear different voices, different authors who just have a different view of things. And so to say, well, I don't connect with that, well, connect with it. Open yourselves up a little bit. Another excuse is the book offends me. This is a big thing these days. Everyone's offended by something. And it's true, there are some books that are really quite offensive, and they were almost written to, or there's something about the subject matter that is just offensive by its very nature. I'm thinking these are the kind of books that appeal to baser emotions, and their intention is just to stir you up to levels of anger, or even sexual sexual upset to such a level that you kind of lose your mind. Fortunately, this kind of writing has, most of it has disappeared down the sinkhole of the dark web, or so I'm told. But these are, this is pornography in its many different forms. Pornography isn't just about sex. I'm talking about the kind of writing that is written with the intention of causing you to hate another group of people, whether because of their race or their religion or their social status. The kind of writing that is meant to stir sexual feelings to such a degree that it demeans the human intimacy. The kind of sexual pornography that discusses in great detail violence against women, or even worse, violence against children, or even violence against men. This stuff is offensive just by its very nature. However, if a book is offending you because it's presenting different ideas to you, or ideas that challenge your most dearly held beliefs, don't give up on that. These are challenging your beliefs for a reason. Look upon it as a way to sharpen your beliefs, as a way to sharpen your defense of the things that you believe. Or maybe some of those beliefs that you have should be challenged. So if the book is offending you because, say, you're a committed Christian and this book is about Islam, don't put it aside because of that. Maybe you need to know a little bit more about Islam. You don't have to change, you don't have to become a Muslim, but still, nonetheless. And the same is true if you're Islamic and you're reading a book that's praising Christianity. This may be difficult for you, but you should at least get a sense of what Christians are all about. If you're an atheist and you're reading a very religious, spiritual book that seems to kind of tax your ability to suspend your disbelief, stick with it, though. Know what believers think and why they think the way they do. So, if it offends because of religious reasons, stick with it. If it offends because of political reasons, we live in a very politically charged time. There's a lot of different political views. There are a lot of political terms that are being used and used incorrectly. People are being called fascists and communists, and the people doing the name calling don't even know what those terms mean. Well, you may be a lover of America, as I am, but you should know what a communist is. You should know what a fascist is. And to find that out, you might have to read a book that's going to offend your political beliefs, your dearly held political beliefs. So if the book offends you, please, suck it up a little bit. Stay with it. You're learning something. Your intellectual horizons are being broadened a little bit. Okay? And again, you don't have to embrace the ideas that offend you, but you should at least know about them a little bit. The book is too hard. That's really, this is something I hear from my students now and then. I'll assign a book, and after a couple of days, some of the students will come up to me and say, there's a lot of big words in this book. This is very hard to understand. Well, if the vocabulary of the book is beyond your vocabulary, get a dictionary. Or we all have little pocket computers or iPhones. Look the word up on Google. There's nothing wrong with expanding your vocabulary. If the book is dealing with concepts that are beyond your understanding or beyond your experience, again, stick with it. Learn something new. Okay? Don't just put it away because it's too hard. To say that it's too hard means that it's challenging your intellect, and rise to the occasion, rise to the challenge. The book is too long. Well, patience is still a virtue. Sometimes an author will have a lot to say, and he will go on for a long time. If the book seems, first of all, you shouldn't be surprised if a book is long, especially if you buy the physical book. Of course, a lot of books are like doorstops, so the book is long. But commit yourself. Have some patience. There is something there. There's something going on, or at least hopefully there is. Don't be put off if a book is too long. And you don't have to, carefully read every single page. You can kind of, I've experienced the thing where sometimes an author seems to wear out his welcome a little bit, and maybe you can skim a little bit. Don't skim too much, though. Give the author his due. But just because a book is too long is not, I don't think it's a valid reason to give up on it. Or the book is boring, or the book isn't working for me. If something like that is happening, it might not be the book's fault. It might be your fault. Again, this has everything to do with expanding your awareness and your understanding of life and humanity. So don't give me this, the book's not working for me. Why don't you work for the book? Okay. So So, I've pointed out how these excuses are often not particularly valid. I'm not saying you have to finish every book that you read or that you start. You don't have to finish every book you start. There have been some books that have defeated me, although I do intend to get back to them. And I've tried to go back to them again and again, and I'm not going to rest until I finish them. The one that comes to mind immediately is Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. I have heard from people who have read it that once you get past the first couple hundred pages, it all opens up for you, and it's a wonderful thing. And I am a Thomas Pynchon fan, but that's just an example of a book that I've had to put aside for a while because I was just something it wasn't working for me. But I'm willing to let it work for me, or I'm going to work for it because I've been told that it is a magnificent book and it's worth the time. So, it is okay to not finish a book that you started reading. But if you're not going to finish it, if you're going to put the book down or put it away or give it away, just, think about your reasons. Be brutally honest with yourself. Are your reasons really good enough to slam the door on an author, to tell an author to shut up? I don't want to hear from you anymore. Are your reasons good enough for doing that? And if they're not good enough for doing that, I would say stick with the book, especially if the book is regarded as a classic. Now, I think I might get in a little bit of trouble here in trying to define what a classic is, a classic book. What is a classic book? There's a lot of different ways to define this, or a lot of criteria you can use to recognize whether a book is a classic or not. Let me suggest two. Let me suggest the first one, which is probably going to get me in some trouble with some people. If literary scholars, people who have spent their lives reading books and thinking about books and writing about books and pondering books, academics who know the history of prose and poetry, the history of historiography, and things like this, if they're telling you that this book is worthwhile, then it's probably worthwhile. They're not always right. You may not agree with them, but they're drawing on a lot of experience, a lot of deep thought and meditation about literature, and their conclusions deserve some attention from you. Again, you don't have to agree with them, but it's a good way of measuring whether something is or maybe is not worth your time. Where do you find these literary scholars? Well, the New York Times Book Review, especially the Sunday edition. I read it every Sunday. And there's not only reviews of books, but there's interviews with authors and some essays about writing and literature. Another is the Times Literary Supplement. That's the London Times. And the British, I'm an Anglophile. I love the British. And it is their language. And I think the writers and the critics in this thin little weekly have a lot of interesting things to say. And then, of course, my favorite journal of literature, fiction and nonfiction, is the New York Review of Books. Again, a lot of good book reviews. The ads are fantastic because they tell you of some new books coming out in all different fields of study, and but also some wonderful essays, literary essays written by literary people. So how do you define a classic? How do you know if you have a classic? Listen to the experts, and there are experts in this field. Now, I know in America, another odd thing about us Americans is we don't like the experts. We don't trust them anymore. But I think that way leads to madness. You've got to recognize that some people might know a little more than you do about literature. And your choice of books should not just be based on what makes you feel good. It shouldn't just be based on your emotional response. Your choice of books, whether fiction or nonfiction, should be based on the kind of intellectual spark that it triggers inside of you. Okay, and the literary experts can do that for you. Now, if you don't like that one, here's another way of determining whether something is a classic or not. If it's withstood the test of time, if the book has been regarded as significant and important from generation to generation, century to century sometimes, if every new generation picks up a particular book and they find something of great insight in it, if the book resonates down through the corridors of time and continues to resonate, then I would say that's a classic. That's a book to pay attention to. And that's a book you should read. And if you start reading it and some of these other hobgoblins come up and say, oh, this is boring, this is too hard, push those away. This book has been around, a particular book might have been around for centuries, and people still read it, it's still in print, and it still resonates with the readers. Then you should be one of those readers too and find what that is. Let me give you a recent example of something that an experience, a reading experience that happened to me very recently, and it involves this book, Quo Vadis, by Henryk Sienkiewicz, Quo Vadis. Okay, this edition, the translator is Jeremiah Curtin, Quo Vadis. Now, this book, Sienkiewicz was a Polish author. This book was published in the late 1800s to great acclaim. The book takes place in the days of ancient Rome during the reign of the Emperor Nero. Now, Sienkiewicz was already a heralded author in his own land. He had written a trilogy that dealt with Polish history in the 16th or 17th century. And he does write historical fiction. This is a novel. It's a work of fiction, but it does deal with an actual period of time, and some of the characters in there are actual historical figures. But he does write historical fiction, and he was known for doing meticulous research. And Quo Vadis is meticulously researched. I teach Roman history. I've been teaching Roman history for over 20 years. I know a book that's been well researched into Rome, and he handles the information that he's acquired beautifully and without any strain. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about the lives of the ancient Romans. Some of his descriptions might be open to debate, but he's got it down. And this book, Quo Vadis, is the book that gave Sienkiewicz his international reputation. The book has been translated into 50 different languages. I got the English translation here. There are also a number of movie versions of it, silent films. The version I know best, and I think many of you might have seen on television, was one of those big Hollywood productions with a cast of thousands. It's called Quo Vadis. I think it came out in the 1950s. And Peter Ustinov plays the Emperor Nero. Peter Ustinov used to be a really famous actor. Robert Taylor is in the starring role, who was also once upon a time a very famous actor. That's how I became exposed to the story. Now, the book is regarded as something of a classic, maybe a minor classic. I wouldn't put it up there with Dostoevsky, but still, it's a magnificent work, and it's fascinating. It's got a lot of insight. As I said, it takes place during the reign of the Emperor Nero. The two main characters are fictional characters. This is historic fiction. One of them is a Roman centurion or a tribune, someone of high rank in the Roman military. His name is Vincius, and he falls in love with the beautiful Lygia, but he can't seem to attract her. She rebuffs his every advance, and then he discovers the reason for this is she's one of those mysterious Christians who seem to be multiplying on the scene. So a large part of the book is Vincius trying to seduce Lygia, and she's constantly putting him off. There are some characters in the book, though, that are legitimately historical figures. Of course, Nero, as I've already mentioned. St. Peter and St. Paul are in this because they were in Rome during the reign of Nero, and they actually have speaking parts. That's kind of fascinating how Sienkiewicz kind of imagines that. Also, Gaius Petronius is in it. We know him from history as he was like an advisor to Nero's court, but we don't know much else about him. Now, for a writer of historical fiction, these historic personalities are wonderful because as the author, you can imagine an entire backstory for a person, and yet the person was still a real person. And so Sienkiewicz kind of does this quite a bit. So also, the book has been criticized for being pro-Christian. I'm not exactly sure what's meant by that or why people point this out. But considering the story that it tells, it's taking place during the reign of Nero, who was one of the most depraved and who was just, up to his neck in excess, sensual excess, even in his own time. The Romans referred to him as the beast. He was despised. He was bloodthirsty. He murdered his own mother. These kinds of things. And if in the novel he and his cronies exist on one side of the equation and the Christians exist on the other, well, of course the Christians are going to look like the good guys, compared to someone like Nero, who's the beast. So I'm not sure about that, but The edition I have of this book runs to about 400 pages. I got about halfway through, up to page 200, and I have to admit, for the first time in a very long time, I was thinking of bailing on this book. Up to the first half of the book is this kind of corny romance. It's overly sentimental. It's overly written. It's a lot of the characters act in certain ways that it almost seems like stage direction for a play from the late 19th century, or a stage direction for a silent movie. Vinicius, his frustration is always described by Sienkiewicz as he's always holding his head in his hands. Oh, I'm so frustrated. But that's his gesture for everything. Petronius, who's supposed to be the great Roman Stoic, at least in this version of his life, whenever he encounters a moral or ethical challenge, Sienkiewicz just talks about how Petronius just shrugged his shoulders, this kind of thing. A lot of, oh, woe is me, this kind of business. And I think, oh my gosh, this is really awful. This is really quite terrible. And also, in certain parts of the book, the language of the King James Bible is used. A lot of thee and thou, okay? Also, certain syntax, it's not like, kill the Christians, said Nero. Instead, it'll be, kill the Christians, saith Nero. And that gets very distracting, and it's not persistent. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes it's just used in that way. I don't know if that was Sienkiewicz's choice. I don't know what that would look like in Polish. That was the original language of the book. Or maybe it was the translator's choice, but it was getting a little redundant and a little annoying. And I got to about the 200th page, and I'm thinking, gee, I don't know. I'm loath to not finish a book I've started, but I did know that this book was regarded as a classic. It still is. Sienkiewicz is one of the great literary stars of Polish literature. So I thought, well, I'll hang in there for a little bit longer. And I'm glad I did, because the second half of this book is amazing. One of the major events during the reign of Nero was the burning of Rome. And all the ancient sources talk about it. Some give us a little bit of detail, not as much as we might like, but Sienkiewicz goes into great detail about this event. The city burned for a little over a week. About 3/4 of the city was destroyed. About of the 10 of the city's 14 districts were just reduced to ash as a result of this. The number of deaths, strangely enough, it's not recorded in any of the ancient histories that we have, but it was easily in the hundreds, perhaps the thousands. And tens of thousands lost their homes and their property as a result of this. Rome at that time was easily the largest city in the world, with a population in excess of 1 million. That was very uncommon in antiquity. As I said, the fire burned for over a week, a catastrophic event. And Sienkiewicz devotes 7 chapters to this, and it never lags. It's fascinating. His imagination is kind of working overtime. He's describing the scenes that one might have seen, stuff he's just, he's not getting this out of the original sources. He's imagining what this must have looked like. The framework for this is Vinicius is rushing through the city trying to find his lady love, and he's going to all these different places. But in the process, Sienkiewicz just describes these horrifying scenes of mobs of people lost and despairing, fighting each other, some running for their lives. At one point, he describes wild animals roaming through the streets of Rome trying to escape the fires. Lions, leopards, panthers. And I'm thinking, what's that about? Well, of course there would be wild animals kept in cages. They provided entertainment for the Roman people. Gladiators would fight wild animals. So during the fire of Rome, some of these animals must have been left to their own devices, or the cages open and they ran free. But just the imagination involved in this and how Sienkiewicz rises to the occasion made it all worthwhile. The first 200 pages made that all worthwhile to hang in with this. Another major event that occurred during Nero's reign was this is the first imperial persecution of the Christians, because the Christians were blamed for the fire. The suspicion then and the suspicion now is that Nero, started this fire, or he at least encouraged it or supported the idea. He may have wanted to level the city to have it rebuilt according to his insane plans. We do know he wanted to rename the city Neropolis, or the city of Nero. So he might have been the instigator of the fire. And the Roman people, who didn't like him anyway, when the word began to spread that Nero did this, Nero was looking for a scapegoat, so he fingered the Christians. Now, these are the Neronian persecutions. They didn't last for a real long time. It was fairly limited in terms of geography. It didn't spread throughout the entire empire. But it was the first time the Christians were kind of pulled out and systematically executed. But for Nero, it wasn't just a matter of killing them. He wanted some entertainment value out of this. So this is where you get the stories of Christians being thrown to the lions and other wild animals, Christians being killed by gladiators, Christians being dismembered, Christians being crucified en masse, Christians being their bodies being lit on fire to provide light for the city at night. And Sienkiewicz again describes this in such detail over a period of chapters. This is absolutely horrific. It's as grisly as anything you might find in a Stephen King novel. But through all of this, by the end of the novel, Sienkiewicz does find something good, a little shred of light, a little bit of goodness that survived all of this. And Sienkiewicz himself was a devout Catholic, and so he's talking about Christianity survived even the worst of persecutions. But whether you're a Christian or not, he does find hope out of all this despair and emptiness. And it's a beautiful literary revelation that he offers. And I would have missed all this if I'd stopped the book halfway through, if I decided not to finish it. And so my recommendation is, if you're reading a book that's regarded as a classic, and you're 100 pages in or 200 pages in, you're only halfway through, don't give up on it, because you might be denying yourself a magnificent experience and something that will even help you to maybe, add some depth to your humanity. And remember, this ability to read is a gift, either from God or the gods, or a gift of evolution, or whatever it is. This is a wonderful thing we can do that only humans can read. And it's a way of taking a vacation without luggage. It's a way of expanding your intellectual horizons. It's a way of meeting people you would normally never meet. It's a way of time travel. Why deny yourself those many opportunities by putting a book down without unfinished? So my recommendation is, if you're reading a book and you're struggling with it, well, maybe put it aside, but put it aside for another time. If it's a classic, I would say, and I would encourage you, stick with it. Reading is always worth your time, even if what you're reading is a little challenging and maybe not always as exciting as you would like it to be. That's all for now.